It was yesterday that Poland offered to send all of its MiG-29 jets, Russian-made jets, to Ukraine via a U.S. airbase in Germany. One top U.S. official called the announcement a, quote, surprise move. Well, today, the Pentagon spokesman made it clear the idea was a non-starter.
Secretary Austin thanked the minister for Poland's willingness to continue to look for ways to assist Ukraine. But he stressed that we do not support the transfer of additional fighter aircraft to the Ukrainian Air Force at this time, and therefore have no desire to see them in our custody either. But at this time, we believe the provision of additional fighter aircraft provides little increased capabilities at high risk. We also believe that there are alternative options that are much better suited to support the Ukrainian military in their fight against Russia, and we will continue to pursue those options.
All right, so the U.S. says it won't give Ukraine the planes that they've urgently asked for, and that there are alternative options. But the world is asking, what are those options? Well, here's one that's being proposed in an open letter signed by 27 foreign policy experts. Quote, we urge the Biden administration, together with NATO allies, to impose a limited no-fly zone over Ukraine, starting with protection for humanitarian corridors that were agreed upon in talks between Russian and Ukrainian officials. What we seek is the deployment of American and NATO aircraft, not in search of confrontation with Russia, but to avert and deter Russian bombardment that would result in massive loss of Ukrainian lives, end quote. Joining us now is one of the experts who signed that letter, John Herbst, former United States ambassador to Ukraine. He's currently director of the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. Ambassador, good evening. Thank you for making time to be with us tonight. Let's talk about this. The world is looking at this, and they don't really understand a disagreement between America and Poland about these particular planes. They are watching a humanitarian disaster unfold, and they want to know what can actually be done. You and 26 others have proposed something very specific. Please tell us about it.
Correct. Look, it's very simple. Moscow's 2-week-old offensive against Ukraine has largely bogged down. Putin is frustrated. When his campaign in Syria, which he began in the fall of 2015, did not produce results, after several months, he went to massive bombardment. There's a risk he'll do that now, and he's already bombarded residential areas in Kharkiv. If he does that, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian civilians will die. The idea that we're proposing is to establish not necessarily a no-fly zone, but an area where Russian planes will not be able to bomb civilians. That's the basic idea.
When you said a limited or contained no-fly zone, what would that look like over the country? Who determines to what it is limited?
Well, we would make a determination. We, the U.S. government, and with our NATO allies, would make a determination. It would look at areas where civilians are trying to get out of war zones, where we know the Russians have blocked the establishment of real humanitarian corridors. It would certainly operate in the west and around Kyiv. It might operate further east, where, again, civilians are subject to daily bombardment and the Russians are not letting them leave. And we would not, unlike a regular fly zone, initiate any action against Russian or any other forces. We would be there to make sure that action is not taken against innocent civilians.
This seems to have been rejected fairly quickly out of hand. You regret that that's the case. You think that there's more creative thinking to be had between the United States and NATO.
The rejection of this out of hand, just like the unfortunate decision by the Biden administration on the warplanes to Ukraine, suggests timidity, suggests the United States thinks that somehow we have to avoid provoking Putin. Putin, who's just been escalating massively in Ukraine. For us to simply send those weapons to Ukraine so it can defend itself is the normal decision. To say we can't do it because it's escalatory suggests fear. Putin has a fine nose for detecting fear, and that just emboldens him to be more aggressive. Mm-hmm. So we've seen a very sad week in American statesmanship regarding the rejection out of hand of this limited no-fly zone and the rejection of these warplanes to a country which is defending itself against a much stronger neighbor.
Ambassador, the things that are starting to look like war crimes, the potential deliberate targeting of civilians, the attacks on hospitals, does that change the way the United States and the world should be looking at this? That this is becoming a humanitarian catastrophe that we need to get involved in to solve, and we need to maybe make the idea of getting into a conflict with Russia of secondary importance?
Of course, you're right. And that's what makes those decisions this week so short-sighted. The American public overwhelmingly supports Ukraine facing this massive aggression from Moscow. And if, in fact, Moscow moves to this massive bombardment, the public's going to be calling for us to do more. And we saw the President Biden last week reject stopping oil purchases from Russia. And then under congressional and public pressure, he changed his mind. And this may well happen again. Once Moscow begins a campaign which murders tens of thousands of Ukrainian civilians, we may be forced to act precisely along the lines that my 26 colleagues suggested. We should not be saying no to a proposal which would save those lives. What we've done by taking these two off the table, if only temporarily, we're conveying to Moscow that we can be intimidated. And that's a very dangerous thing with a man like Putin. We are far more powerful than Russia. We need to remember that we're a superpower. And that Putin has to worry about us at least as much, if not more, than we have to worry about him. And that should undergird our diplomacy and our national security policy in this crisis. Thank you.
Ambassador, we appreciate your time tonight. John Herbst is the former United States ambassador to Ukraine, the current director of the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council.